This is Damien. Hello. A normal British bloke who, like many others, thinks of himself as a good human being. What can I say? I'm a nice guy. But what if I told you that behind closed doors, Damien is personally funding the production of sophisticated weapon systems that are being used in wars all over the world, and that he assists in the manufacture of highly addictive substances that are responsible for around 8.5 million deaths a year. That's about the population of London. Still think Damien's a nice guy? Well, this just got a bit awkward. Socially responsible investing. Is it a thing? Let's get it.
Came through dripping Aquafina, I'm sipping 15, kept a weapon on me.
The primary goal of corporations and businesses is to generate profits. But at what cost? Be it wide-scale deforestation and destruction of our natural habitat for meat production, the melting of the ice caps due to emissions from greenhouse gases from resource-heavy industries, or the crippling cost of essential medicines produced to combat the burden of treatment for diseases that are caused by the consumption of harmful substances which are promoted to us by businesses hoping to get us hooked on these products, even as children. Does anyone remember those chocolate cigarettes you could buy as a kid in the 90s? I mean, what the f was that about? It seems like in the modern world, you can pick any industry and behind it is the exploitation of either the natural world or the consumer purchasing the product. This isn't new. In the past, this probably wasn't a problem because, let's face it, we didn't know it was happening. Access to information and evidence was limited. You could only really experience what was going on within a few miles of your location, with your only real exposure to the wider world being the news, and if you went on holiday a few times a year if you were lucky. So the measure of good business has always been, how much money does it make? But times are a-changing. We now have a live, real-time view of what is going on in the world, and it's shaping behaviour. The British public, in my opinion, on an individual level, are doing more than we ever have to reduce our impact on the worlds we live in. We realise our actions and choices on a day-to-day basis do matter. We put pressure on businesses to have an active stance on important social issues, like Black Lives Matter and climate change. And on a day-to-day level, we try and reduce our own impact. Don't leave that light on. Don't overfill the kettle. Don't eat meat on Wednesdays. Don't eat meat ever again. We recycle and reuse because we refuse to let our refuse pollute the world. So why should investing be any different? On this channel, I've openly discussed my use of index funds and my belief they provide a simple way to gain access to the stock market and the benefits of long-term compounding when investing over time. The main benefits of buying index funds is they're cheap and easy to use. And you know that when buying an index fund such as the FTSE 100, you're gaining access to the biggest businesses in the UK, and those businesses have been grouped together on their ability to be successful over the long run, or in other words, to be profitable. The use of profitability over the long run as a grouping factor produces a massive issue. We don't get to choose the companies that are inside of that index. Increasingly so, it's becoming more important to the individual investor to make sure that the businesses that they invest in align with their own morals. So much so that funds invested into so-called ethical businesses have seen their total holdings balloon since 2017, with more than 40.5 billion, I meant to say trillion, now held in these ethical index funds. And it isn't hard to see why. Quick look at the FTSE 100 and you will see that included within the top 100 businesses in the UK, you have a weapons producer in the form of BAE, a cigarette maker, and one of the world's largest alcohol producers. You only have to be against one of those industries and ultimately that rules out the ability to invest in that index. So the financial services sector has stepped up to the plate and started to offer investments that are suited towards the ethical investor. These ESG funds, or socially responsible investing. But remember, the primary goal of corporations and businesses is to generate profits. And even the providers of these ESG funds are corporations. So are they delivering what they promise? Can someone with a certain set of morals buy into these funds and rest easy at night? Or is it just another form of exploitation? But this exploitation could be even worse, because really they could just be ripping off people who are just trying to do good by the world. Before we get into this, I just want to say that morals are a weird thing. Yours could be different to mine. So today I'm not going to get into a debate around what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. That's not what I'm here for. I just want to present my thoughts on what I believe ESG funds are, the benefits and negatives of them, so you can go away and make a decision in your own time about whether this is an investment that suits you. First of all, let's start with, what is an ESG fund? SRI, ESG or impact investing are all just posh ways of saying businesses that don't ruin the planet that we live in and are trying to make a positive impact on the world. ESG, or environmental, social and governance, is a scoring system, a means of testing a business to determine if they're ethical based on factors ranging from environmental impact to fair pay to how diverse they are. An ESG index fund will essentially look to take this criteria and apply it to businesses to determine whether they are ethical or not. They can then decide whether they include them within their index fund. You can then buy that index fund. The first thing you need to understand is there is no definitive scoring system. It's up to the business to take the ESG principles and apply them to their own decision making. And the first thing they'll do is they'll get all of the businesses in the world and they'll look to whittle them down to make the selection process easier. There's two real broad ways that they could do this, through negative screening and positive screening. So first of all, negative screening. So negative screening removes certain businesses from consideration based on certain points. They are removed from the list of ethical businesses based on what they do. Guns, tobacco, gambling are all examples of businesses that are commonly negatively screened. The screening can also apply to certain moral preferences. So you could have a fund that invests in all businesses but screens out specifically fossil fuels, or a fund that meets the expectations of the Islamic faith. Positive screening is much more involved. They will look to assess the business to determine what it's doing and look to actively invest then in businesses that are making a positive impact on the world. So rather than just eliminating gun and tobacco companies, they will look to actively select businesses like green energy businesses. So using a combination of negative and positive screening, they will whittle down the list to a selection of businesses. With the remaining businesses, they'll then attempt to apply a score to them based on the ESG principles, and any business that scores high enough will be accepted into the index fund. For example, MSCI, a company that provides funds with the ESG approach, scores companies on 37 separate points, which are on screen now. But it's up to the provider of the index fund we invest in how they apply the ESG framework, and ultimately what businesses get in. So we now understand that ESG is a loose guide on how to determine if a business is morally sound. Index fund providers can then take this framework and apply it during their decision-making process to determine whether a business should be put into an index fund or not. Once they've done this, they will then market this index fund to us as moral investors in the hope that we will purchase into that index fund. MSCI, for example, have a world fund of all of the businesses that they believe comply with this ESG framework. But then they also break this down further into lots of categories, so you can go, okay, I don't like guns, or I'm a Catholic. So there's an element of customization and choice there, so you can pick a particular category that's in line with your own morals. The benefits of ethical investing are clear. You support businesses that are responsible, and ultimately you feel better about it. And as long as the process for screening is done well, this is exactly what a lot of people are looking for. Also, regulations over time tend to get stricter, and businesses that engage in ethical practices are well placed to thrive in a world where, if a company is seen as not ethical, it can be the end of them. But what are the shortcomings of this style of investment? The first thing I want to mention is that the application of the ESG principles is down to the fund manager. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, then morality is in the hands of the ESG fund manager, which can potentially create a conflict. Ultimately, an index fund wants your money because any pound that you have in that fund, they can collect a fee on. It's in the best interests of the fund manager to ensure that they pick businesses that they believe will be profitable in the long run. This could mean that an ESG fund manager is incentivized to pick businesses that may not really actually align with your morals. For example, big tech often slips through and is included in ESG funds. But some of you watching may think that a lot of the problems in the world are down to social media and big tech. Apple announces they want to try and save the world by not including headphones and a charger in the boxes. At the same time, they're releasing 5 new phones made from raw materials mined from the earth just 12 months after they released their last 5 phones. Or social media businesses that's destroying the confidence of the youth today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It would be great to have a uniform understanding of what ESG means and to have a strict criteria to apply to all businesses. But ultimately that is impossible, because in order to agree if a business is moral or not, we'd all need to agree on what is right or wrong. And unfortunately, as human beings, we all find that pretty difficult. So a business compiling an ethical index fund may let companies slip through the net that may not be your kind of thing. You need to be looking at the investments within the fund to make sure the companies do fit your morals. The best way to do this is to Google the name of the fund with fact sheet at the end and take a look at what is in there. If you don't know a particular business, you'll need to Google them to see what they're about. And another thing that you may need to consider is the fact that these companies compiling these ESG funds could just be jumping on the bandwagon to get a quick buck. The demand for ESG investments has exploded, so people will try and cash in on this. Another example that may help you understand this is the recent rise in veganism and flexitarian diets. It's absolutely incredible that so many people are trying to reduce their meat to help the world. And it could also be argued that it's incredible that all these businesses have stepped up to the plate and started providing plant-based offerings. Or if you're cynical, you could say that the likes of McDonald's and KFC are releasing plant-based versions of their meals so that they can cash in. And that ultimately, if the trend was suddenly to have green food, then McDonald's would start offering this. Speaking of cashing in, that brings me on to my next point nicely. Another thing that I'd be looking for when shopping around for ESG funds is the amount that they charge. I understand that there's extra work that goes into compiling an ESG fund, as ultimately the index fund manager needs to do research into the businesses to decide whether they're ethical or not. But anything above 0.5% as a fee, I'd be questioning why. Just like the fact when you go into a shop, the vegan or organic options often cost more, because the producers know they can charge more for them. I have concerns that some ESG funds will charge a premium to people who are just trying to be ethical. The final drawback is the fact that ESG practices by their very nature eliminate businesses, meaning your funds are concentrated across a smaller selection of businesses because you're eliminating either companies or whole sectors based on the fact that you don't think that they're ethical. That means your funds are put into a smaller pot of businesses, and if any particular sector or business doesn't do well, you could be overexposed to that business. I do think personally that this can be combated though by investing in an ESG fund that has a world focus, such as the Old Mutual MSCI World ESG Index, which is included on apps like Moneybox. But again, it's something to keep an eye on, and I would make sure that any ESG fund that I was investing in covered a broad selection of sectors. I think ethical investing is possible and a commendable act. But just like trying to lose weight, it's the cruel truth that it's harder to lose the weight than it is to put it on. And it's harder to be ethical than it is to not. If you want to invest ethically, you're going to need to keep an active interest into what you're purchasing. You're going to need to do a bit more research and look at the businesses that are held within the funds so that you can make sure they align with your specific morals. It's an unfortunate truth that someone who doesn't care about the ethics of a business when investing can just focus on profit and really blindly slap money into an index fund without much thought. Just like an individual who doesn't care about recycling can just bin everything in one bin. But the people who do care take that extra time to recycle because it's worth it to them. And if it's worth it to you to make sure that you're invested in businesses that align with your morals, just take that little bit of extra time to research what is actually going on. But be wary of companies trying to cash in on a trend and make sure you're getting good value for money. Don't buy the investing equivalent of an egg in a pot with a limp piece of spinach just because the person selling it to you has given it a fancy name like a protein pot. It's just an egg in a pot. ESG index funds are a great idea. I would just make sure that I wasn't paying more than 0.5% as a fee, and that I'd clearly defined my morals and that I made sure any business within the index fund was in keeping with those morals. I would then pat myself on the back for being such a lovely human being, unlike Damien at the start of the video. Pew pew.
Came through dripping Aquafina, I'm sipping 15, kept a weapon on me.